Okay, what I'm going to do is just give a bit of an overview of who the Centre for Social Justice is, who we are, what we do. I'm then going to talk about a major report we did last year in our 20th year anniversary called Two Nations, where we did a full analysis of where the nation really is at. Slight spoiler alert, things are not going that well for those that we're here for. And then I'm going to try in true Yorkshire style to bring the tempo up and say why there's reasons for hope. Okay, and I'm going to move around a bit, so I'm sorry on the camera front if that's irritating. CSJ, let me just talk a little bit about this first. We were set up 20 years ago to this year, and it's a think tank, so the aim is to try and influence government thinking and policy. We work right across the aisle in that way to drive influence. There's three things that we do. Firstly, we advocate for the poorest, which is actually quite rare in a Westminster setup. We don't have an ideology, we're not just on one theme, we're about a group of people, and that's those most struggling and those that don't have a voice. And we will be unflinching on that. Lots of people come in and bring their own kind of ideas and agendas, some good stuff, some not so good stuff, but we're about those most struggling. Secondly, in the way we do this, our aim is to see people as potential to be developed, not problems to be solved. So often in Westminster, the conversation about poverty, and it's an important one, is about welfare levels, which is absolutely right, and we talk about that. But we try and get them to focus on root causes of issues. We talk about the 5 pathways where we come from, and if you are in the bottom deciles of income, you are more likely to have gone to an inadequate school, 28 times more likely. Your family's more likely to have broken down. You're more likely to be in debt. Worklessness is rife and addiction in certain communities. So we try and move politicians to think as much about that stuff as some of the other stuff. And then finally, the third thing we do is we talk about that we connect the back streets of this nation with the corridors of power. We have regional offices across the country now. I mean, I say regional offices, it's a generous description of what we have. We have a person in each region whose job it is to go out, Ben is here today, whose job it is to go out and find the very best stuff that no one has seen or heard about. We are passionate about small charity, social entrepreneur, and a slight thing, which I hope isn't being filmed, that none of our ideas are ours. They're not original. They all come from the front lines because someone is solving the problem somewhere. Our job is to bring it back and elevate it and get it done. And we've got a proud track record. Last year we saw about a third of our ideas get into government policy, about 7 billion of investment into the stuff we said to do. And we also ourselves helped run a few different foundations and grants, and we gave about 4 million quid out across the regions as well. So in a nutshell, that's us. Last year we moved into Yorkshire, which was the dream come true. Though I was slightly surprised that we had to, because I didn't think there was any social problems in Yorkshire. And this is what we've been up to. Ben has kind of brought together about 100 small charities in our network here. We've given out not as much as we'd like, but about 300 grand to some of the best ones. We do an awards programme. I'm sure some of the ones we fund are all people that you know. And we also have given out some national awards. And a lot of the Yorkshire charities have been directly involved in a lot of our big campaigning on issues like ghost children, like Friday releases from prison, that kind of thing. So, the Social Justice Commission. Last year we brought together a cross-party group in our 20th year anniversary to try and do a State of the Nation, to really try and analyse where things are at. We actually kick-started the whole thing with a big listen in Yorkshire, in Leeds Armouries, with Kim Ledbetter, 100 charities. The Leeds Rhino player Stevie Ward came, half of the female staff collapsed, we had to resuscitate them out of sheer love for him, and we cracked on. Some of our commissioners, some right across the piece, people like Andy Burnham, people like Mervyn King, big political representation, big business representation, big charity representation. The whole aim was to just really get a sense of where things are at. We knew there was an election incoming, but also we knew there was a lot of incredible funders and people out there that wanted to see where things and how can we go after some of the big issues at play. So we brought all of this together. And let me show you what we found. Oh, firstly, here's some of the publicity. I only bring this up because one of the commissioners was Liz Earle. Some of you may be well aware of her products. She also taught me something amazing that I'm going to give to you all for free, and that is if you want the best bottle of Prosecco, you need to buy a SodaStream. It's not 1980, they're reselling them, and put a bottle of white wine in the SodaStream, and it turns into a Prosecco. Heard it here first? It didn't make the final recommendations on the commission, but nonetheless it's helped my wife no end, and it's helped our finances in these tough times. Okay, I'm going to clump what we found into 3 areas. Petrol, elephants, and playing fields, okay? If you see these in the manifestos, you know where they came from. But again, spoiler alert, they are not in the manifesto. 3 things that we found. That lockdown poured petrol on the fires that were already out there in some of the toughest communities. And so far, the scale of response has not matched the scale of need. There was big problems already out there. This isn't saying that there wasn't. But lockdown poured petrol on those, and no one's talking about it in the way that they should. Secondly, there are some elephants in the room that we just don't talk about, and we need to. There's too much heat on stuff at times and not enough light. So our job is to try and bring out some of these key debates that need to be had in a more mature way in order to find solutions. And thirdly, there is an uneven playing field going on within the charity sector. All of you guys will be aware of this, but particularly has been exacerbated in lockdown through what's happening with big charities and what's happening with small charities. And we want to talk about it a bit more. Okay, I'm going to just get into where the petrol was poured. And again, this isn't particularly uplifting, but I just want to show some of the things. I might have to come over this side so I can actually read what it says. One of the big things we went for during lockdown, right when it started, was looking at schools, what was happening with young people who are not in. Now, at the CSJ on our website, please visit it, we've created an absence tracker on schools. We all know how important education is for those that we are passionately serving. And the results are really bad. So persistent absence, forgive me if you know all of this, persistent absence is if a child is out of school up to half a day a week. That level is now at 1.68 million. That's 24% of all children are missing at least half a day a week at school. If you're in a poor area, well, if you're in any area, that matters. But that's big. That's up 83% post-pandemic. Okay, the next thing is actually, that's bad. What's worse is a thing called severe absence, which they didn't even measure as a thing before we started to push it. And that is if you're out of school over 50% of the time. So you're out of school more than you're in it. Persistent absence levels are now at 165,000 children are out of school more than they're in it. That's up 161% post-pandemic. Since we're in Yorkshire, I calculated the football stadiums around here. It's the equivalent of Ellen Road, Bramall Lane, Hillsborough, John Smith Stadium, MKM, New York Stadium, filled with under-16s every day of the week who are not in school, and very few people know where they are. We all know what that can lead to. We all know the loss of potential, etc. And that number is getting worse. If I was stood in front of you 3 months ago, I'd have said it's really bad. It's at 140,000. It's at 165 now. Persistent absence, the under 10% thing, that's getting better, and that's what government will tell you. It's getting better. It's not. Severe absence is a whole lot worse. We got Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Secretary of State for Education from the Labour Party, come and do a big speech on us. She gave it the big one, quite right, she drew attention. But so far I've not seen anything in any manifestos from anyone about how we tackle this. And this is not good. And I think it's important on a local context. That means, and vulnerable children are affected most. If you're on free school meals, it's triple the level of absence than if you are not. And overall absence as a nation from school is 7.3%. I think this is major for in the work that we're all doing. It's really important to think about. Second, and that's that chart at the top is the severe absence over time. Look at the way it's just gone whoosh like that. This graph here is about inactivity. And we've got a huge problem. You'll have seen it. It's being debated a lot about inactivity levels. Just to give you some of the numbers. Economic inactivity is risen to a new worst level. It's up by 1 million people after lockdown to 9.4 million, of which a third are off on long-term sick. That's this one here. A third, 2.3 odd million people off on long-term sick. And there's no real knowing of how to change a bit of this. I'll talk about this about elephants in the room. This is major issues. When I set my charity up, as I mentioned, ran it for 10 years, the whole aim was about trying to get young people into work because we knew it was a game changer. Because even 20 years ago, that was just such a major thing. It's getting harder to do it. If you go to Manchester now, 18% of Manchester's adult population is out of work. If you go to Liverpool, it's something like 21%, Newcastle, similar levels. But the fascinating thing in Manchester, there's 9,212 jobs live now, average salary 29 grand. There's a massive disconnect about how we do this. It's a big issue. Finally, when we went around, second to last, went around communities, the biggest issue without doubt when we talked, and we did hundreds of focus groups, we camped out in places, quite literally, the biggest issue was crime, people talking about crime. Hence the reason we all know in an election year antisocial behaviour comes up because everyone wants to look tough, that we're the toughest around. But it's really important to people. In the pandemic, 500,000 of court cases were backlogged. There's no feel of a rule of law. Policing, crime is a big issue to those that we represent. And then here's the looked after children rate that's gone, again, through the roof. Children in care is now 83,800 nationally, 33,000 taken into care in the last year. This is big, but it disproportionately affects those in the north of England. I'll mention, since we've got some Northwestians in the room, the Northwest accounts for a quarter of children's homes places. Latest report showing that 1 in every 52 children in Blackpool are going into care. This is serious stuff. How does that affect here? Ben pulled together, and we've been working on this. We're very passionate about the absence from school. Yorkshire and the Humber is second worst in terms of persistent absence, but it's worst in the nation for severe absence. In terms of children in care, another area that we work, or try to work quite a lot on, Wakefield has the highest rate of care leavers who are not in education, employment or training, 88%. This is kind of really tough stuff, and the levels of them progressing. So, I wanted just to give you a flavour of some of the stuff we're looking, some of the issues we're dealing with, and frankly some of our frustrations that in national debates that are going on, a lot of this is not in there. Elephants in the room. There's quite a few of these. And I'm going to whiz through because I know time's against. Firstly, and this all comes from our charities, the small charities, telling us the stuff we want to talk about. Over-medicalisation of society. You look at this graph here, is about boys' mental health. So this, as a projection, this is when the pandemic happened. This was the projection of levels of kind of mental health, if for want of a better phrase, that would have carried on going like this. We don't know that for sure, but that's what the projections. Look at the jump here, and if there's no change, this is where we'll get to. 40% of the most deprived said they had mental health issues in comparison to 13% of the general population. Big issue in boys that we're not talking about as a nation, elephant in the room. But what does it mean in terms of how we're changing this? We're moving a lot to medical ways of dealing with it rather than some of the kind of more classic sport, work as a positive thing, lots of those types of stuff, which our charities are all using, but we're not having a good national debate on it. Secondly, on the work issue, as I mentioned, one of our passions was getting young people into jobs. We knew that would change their lives. We knew that it was a dignity aspect. We knew earning your own money, buying your first pint for yourself was important. But a lot of people are increasingly thinking, what's the point? Only 15% end up progressing out of entry-level positions. So there's this issue of where are the good jobs? How do we progress people when they're in jobs? There's an issue our charities are saying is, what's the point of progressing people that way if they get stuck and fall out? So there's a big conversation to have there. And also the level on the sick side. I mentioned it, the staggering levels. Now, government have come out all big and strong on this one. Rishi did a big speech actually at our place on this where they wanted to kind of crack down versus alternative approaches that have been seen from the Labour Party. But on the whole, the sick levels are at those, they're kind of, we put this phrase, that Britain is sick, but being sick pays. And there's a big debate about how that's looking. And finally, maintenance. So many of our charities are all about changing lives, not about kind of just leaving them be, about potential, etc. But things like methadone has gone through the roof. And that's done to kind of quell some of the antisocial behaviour, some of the issues, rather than there's some staggering stat about the levels of people that dropped out of, I can't find it on here, of kind of their addiction services during the pandemic. And we've ended up putting more and more methadone. And the level of methadone-related deaths is this here, and the spike up here. In a recent study in Scotland, fewer than 4% of people went on to recover from their addictions. 96% either continued taking illicit drugs or simply substituted methadone as replacement substance. We are not getting after lives and seeing their full potential. These are some things we need to talk about. Finally, and there's some things in Yorkshire, but I'll whiz past those. There's some great charities that are talking. Again, some of the policing stuff that we've seen in Sheffield has helped us propose to talk about some of the policing. There's an amazing charity in Leeds actually about the amount of derelict homes that we could renovate. There's loads of potential out there that small charities are doing, and we're trying to bring international discussions. And then big charities. Okay, I'm just going to, let me just find my slide on this. There's an uneven playing field. I don't know who funds what in this room. I'm very passionate about small charities, so I'm massively biased. And I make no apology for that. I've run one, I know what it's like to be in an area, and then a big boy comes to town with some national funding pot, tries to take your young people, you've been there for 8 years, knowing that you're the best for those families. This is what our charities have been telling us. Our job is to report it. Then you start looking at the stats. The largest 100 charities in the country furloughed 33,000 people during the pandemic, cost of 197 million. Many of that furloughing was done of frontline delivery, keeping marketeers, fundraisers alive. Meanwhile, the small guys, over half of them expanded services in the pandemic. They got out in the face of people, they knocked around rules, they were there because they knew they had to be for those most struggling. Since then, a third of small charities have experienced a loss of over half of their income. Indeed, as it now stands, the top 10 charities in the UK spend 243 million quid a year on fundraising alone, which is incidentally the same turnover as the smallest 75,000 charities. It's therefore little wonder then that this graph at the bottom, 85% of charitable income goes to just 4.4% of charities in the country. We're trying to take a bite out of that, trying to kind of manoeuvre it around for the small guys who we know are incredibly effective. 97% of those that close are small ones. I'm not saying that all small ones are good, I'm really not, but it's quite staggering. And overall, as an income profile, small charities have lost 4.6 billion in the last period, and large charities have gained 4.5 billion. This needs to be talked about. And we did a paper called Underfunded and Overlooked about a month ago that we released that talks about a lot of this. Not quite sure what the solutions are yet, other than groups like this, but we're going to damn well try and find some. Okay, since I've thoroughly depressed everyone, I'm available for weddings and bar mitzvahs and various other things. Oh yeah, we'll get another joke on soon. There's always hope. And there is, and I mean this, otherwise I wouldn't be doing the job that I'm doing. Firstly, where the fires are. Small charities are past masters at overcoming the biggest issues, and so are the people in this room. When has this stuff ever scared us? We're often dealing with some of the toughest cases, the most intractable or seemingly intractable issues. We always overcome. So that mentality that is baked in does not scare me. It actually excites me about some of the issues we're facing. Secondly, it's not always bad having government out the way. By that, I mean, let's be quite frank, there's going to be no money. We don't know what the next incoming government actually want to do, and they're playing their cards close to their chest. But the not always being there is no bad thing. As part of our paper, we said it's something like 2.5 billion worth of services the small charity networks are creating in this country. And people say, well, that's too much, it should be government's job. I say, no, make it 5 billion worth, make it 10 billion worth. We need effectiveness in this way, and I think a lot of the effectiveness comes from the types of things that you guys are funding. Yes, we need to find a mechanism to help make it better, more transferable, but I think life change is at the heart of what our small charities do. Secondly, on the elephant, debates are open. You may have noticed there's an election going on, and whilst they might not be talking about very much stuff that we all care about, it nonetheless has defrosted a frozen Westminster that had been frozen for far too long, frankly. And the biggest thing I think that will happen, people will say, well, what will happen when Labour get in and all the rest? I think the biggest change that will affect things is actually we're going to have hundreds of new MPs. That's massive, hundreds of new MPs. And do you know what they need? They need canaries in the mine. They need the people telling them, these are the real issues, not what your civil servants are telling you, these are the real issues. And here are the real solutions. And I think that defrosts things, and that really excites me. As someone who spent the last 9 years trying to convince government to do things, trying to get opposition to do things, the newness and freshness of thinking might actually be a positive thing. Final three things. The regions are calling. Now, in Labour is all about, kind of moving power out to the regions. I do have to say, I wonder how easy that will become once they get into power and how easy it is to give away that power. But nonetheless, that's the movement that is happening all the time. And that's quite exciting for about where money and power and ideas and energy can flow. Absolutely. Secondly, there's a hungry philanthropy market out there. The reason we set up the CSJ Foundation was, frankly, we have a load of donors that support us and trusts and foundations, and they were desperate to get closer to the real stuff, the small stuff in communities. There's a hungry market. We lobbied and won actually the 100 million COVID fund. I remember some of the arguments going on during that time where they were originally going to start at a lot less. So it was actually 3/4 of 750 million, but we got 100 to go to the small guys. And that was all match funded. And the amount of match fund that came in, there was loads. It was 2-to-1 oversubscribed on money philanthropists wanted to put in. And the government cheered it as a success. We challenged them and said, you could have had double the amount going out. There's loads of hunger out there. We just have to build an infrastructure like these kind of groups to make it happen. So whilst there's some problems, I'm actually full of energy and ideas for how we can change things. That's all for now. Thank you.